the mayor of Kyiv has declared a 35-hour curfew after a series of Russian missile strikes hit residential areas of Ukraine's capital. At least 2 people died when a Russian missile hit a 16-story apartment complex. This comes as the prime ministers of the Czech Republic, Poland, and Slovenia traveled to Kyiv to meet with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Talks are also resuming today between Ukraine and Russia. On Monday, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate end to the war.
Ukraine is on fire. The country is being decimated before the eyes of the world. The impact on civilians is reaching terrifying proportions. Countless innocent people, including women and children, have been killed. After being hit by Russian forces, roads, airports, and schools lie in ruins. According to the World Health Organization, at least 24 health facilities have suffered attacks. Hundreds of thousands of people are without water or electricity. And with each passing hour, 2 things are increasingly clear. First, it keeps getting worse. Second, whatever the outcome, this war will have no winners, only losers.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. We go now to Ukraine, where we're joined by Peter Zalmayev, the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, joining us from outside of Kyiv. Peter, welcome to Democracy Now! You have this emergency curfew that has just been imposed. What is it, 35, 36 hours? Can you describe what you're experiencing right now in your community?
Well, the curfew being imposed by the mayor is clearly designed to prevent from any provocations inside. We now have information that weeks prior to the invasion, Russians have sent their diversionary groups, so these clandestine cells to infiltrate the Ukrainian cities, particularly Kiev. There have been a few dozen identified during the first, phase of the war, when there was an attack on Kiev, an attempt to take Kiev by force. Several of these, numbering the hundreds, were neutralized, by which I mean destroyed. But the fear is that there's still a lot of them there, and they will try to, to attack from the inside. And so Kiev is living relatively, considering that we have 2-3 rocket attacks per day now. It's already getting normalized. The idea that the capital of Ukraine is getting rocket attacks and a few people die every day. It's still not on the scale, thank God, of Mariupol, where there are thousands reported dead. So overall, I would say that the situation is, there's no panic necessarily. The steady flow of evacuees, is proceeding, but about a half of the pre-war population of Kyiv remains, which is about 2 million people.
Peter, you were predicting that Putin would invade in early February, when most people were saying he wouldn't dare do this at this extensive level of the whole country. Why did you think this? And talk about what exactly this means for the population of Ukraine. Of course, he expected, like Rumsfeld did when the U.S. invaded Iraq, to be met with flowers and applause. To say the least, this not only has happened, but it has brought together perhaps a very fractured society.
Well, indeed, this Vladimir Putin's miscalculation is pretty glaring. He constantly is trying to poke America in the eyes with what he claims is hypocrisy, such as going into Iraq under false pretenses in 2003, and then building unrealistic expectations, like you said, about how they would be greeted, such as greeted by his liberators. Well, Putin is, whatever he claims about the U.S., misadventures in the Middle East, he seems to be repeating the same mistakes. He miscalculated the strength of the resistance, the morass that he would sink into, and the willingness of Ukrainians to greet Russians as liberators. That has not panned out like that. So when I was saying in February that the invasion was coming, it was obviously clear that for Vladimir Putin to back down after having amassed 200,000 troops on the borders of Ukraine would have been political suicide, just as much as it is for him now to sort of roll back his troops is tantamount to political and also physical suicide, almost, I would say. That's why you hear this talk about the need to find an off-ramp for Vladimir Putin so he can announce victory. That's a separate, subject for conversation, whether that should be happening. When you talk about if you ask me about Ukrainian society, what it has done to the Ukrainian society, well, first of all, almost 3 million people have fled Ukraine. But just judging from what I'm seeing, driving around, I've driven hundreds of miles around Ukraine in the last two or 3 weeks. I have not seen that level of national consciousness ever in my life. I mean, the only precedent for that would be the World War II in 1940s. I mean, this is as black and white an issue for Ukrainians as it's ever been. No shades of gray here. It's a war for liberation. It's a war for freedom. I mean, in peaceful times, I would sort of shy away from these terms. It's too lofty, maybe almost cheesy, if you allow me. But I mean, these are the terms in which we think right now. We look at the invading hordes. We call them orcs, sort of like in the Tolkien language. We call Russia Mordor. It's actually now accepted. I mean, you hear it from Russia, from Ukrainian TV presenters. This is sort of the semi-official way to describe what we're seeing, and the barbarity to which Vladimir Putin's troops have resorted in bombing our city centers, our infrastructure. The damage is estimated upwards of $100 billion already. It is all clear that they're not having any military successes, so they're just bent on revenge and anger that they're venting on civilians.
Peter Zalmayev, you actually are from Donetsk. Can you talk about what's happening there?
It was kind of quiet for a while simply because of the front line there. Having existed in place since 2014, was the most fortified. That's why you see this incredible battle for Mariupol. I mean, I wouldn't be at liberty to venture a guess how many fighters are still there, but the invading force that has encircled Mariupol is infinitely bigger, and yet they're not having. I mean, they're killing civilians, but they're not achieving their goal. They have yet to take a major population center anywhere in Ukraine, with the exception of Kherson, which every day you have sporadic pro-Ukrainian rallies there, and they can't put them down. So coming back to Donetsk, it was relatively quiet, and then the quiet was shattered yesterday when a rocket apparently was blown off the skies and landed in right smack in the center of the city, next to one of my apartments. I own several apartments which have been sitting empty there this whole time, and one of them blew out all the windows in the apartment. The person who's been watching over the apartment just called me and told me that it's looking pretty bad. It was large devastation, and as many as 20 people were killed. We're not sure which rocket it was. A true fog of war situation, and so here you go.
We're hearing numbers as high as 20,000 dead in Mariupol in the south. Is that possible?
Yes, I heard this as well. I would doubt that figure. We're talking definitely several thousand. The last I heard was 2,000 to 3,000, 20,000, maybe an exaggeration, even though that's shaky ground. Trying to question the figures by people who are there. So I don't believe it's 20,000, but we're definitely talking 3,000 or so. And if that is the case, and if the situation, if the trends sort of continues the same way, we are going to see the worst case scenario that was actually mentioned by German tabloid Bild right before the war, which actually, I'll be honest with you, outraged me. I could not believe that this would be our reality. But actually, it predicted as many as 50,000 civilian deaths. So far, I can't tell you we're talking maybe up to 5,000 civilian deaths in the country. But considering that Vladimir Putin has not shown any decrease in appetite bombing us, just God knows how much more casualties we will suffer.
Peter Zalmayev, you mentioned the off-ramp for Putin. What do you see that could be, and what would be acceptable to the people of Ukraine?
Well, an off-ramp, obviously, he's seeking, at least on paper, he's seeking that Ukraine declare a neutral status, a sort of Finlandization. That's sort of been bandied about, this term, and an official decision to stop pursuing NATO membership. I think those are very doable. I do not believe they're really what have been motivating Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. I think it's a very old school 19th century war of subjugation, war of land conquest that we're seeing from Vladimir Putin, the guy who does not use internet and is very much mired in his old kind of old school thinking of military glory and conquest. But at least on paper, their official, displeasure has been NATO expansion, as you know, all along. That is something Ukraine has already sent signs it's willing to compromise on. I think it is willing to announce it will be neutral and basically move away from NATO membership process. But once again, whether that will satisfy Vladimir Putin, I'm not sure, because also connected with it are security guarantees that Ukraine needs to get from Russia in return. In 1994, Budapest as a memorandum was signed, according to which Ukraine would, turn over its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees. Well, we're seeing now how much worth that paper was worth that it was written on, the Budapest memorandum. So what kind of security guarantees will Ukraine receive this time? Vladimir Putin wants to establish a new status quo, get more of Ukraine's territory. Ideally, he wants to cut Ukraine off from all access to the sea and then start negotiating. Well, that's not a viable construct for Ukraine. I do not think so. And Vladimir Putin once again, keep in mind, whatever paper you sign, whatever agreement you reach, the Russian side has shown that it cannot be trusted.
Peter, you are a television host, and I'm wondering if you can talk about the meaning of what just happened in Moscow. You have the state TV employee, a longtime producer there, who stood up behind the presenter and held a no war sign in English and Russian. She had prepared in advance. Her name is Marina Ovsyannikova, a statement where she was wearing a necklace that is red and white and blue and yellow for the Ukraine and Russian colors. And she's disappeared. It seems that she has been arrested. It is not clear. People have not been in touch with her. The significance of this protest and also of the mass Russian anti-war protests. What does that mean to you as a Ukrainian?
Well, it means quite a bit. We are definitely worried about this lady, a journalist, our colleague. Keep in mind, Russia has just passed this draconian law that envisions 15 years in prison term for just such actions as you mentioned by this reporter. 15 years in jail for daring to criticize the government and its conduct in Ukraine. Even calling it a war may land you in prison, simply because the Russian side refuses to call it what it is, and the official term for it is special operation. I am doubtful as to this having necessarily a domino effect, even though since then we've heard one very well-known anchor on another channel has stepped down since. But as far as leading to a domino effect, and also trying to overcome this informational blockade that Vladimir Putin has imposed on Russia, that is doubtful. That is a one-off, I think, and that actually led in Ukraine to, suspicions about, the motivation of this and who the owner of the channel is and how maybe they are trying to position themselves to win an indulgence in the West, to be able to flee to the West, to not have sanctions placed against them, to point to this lady and say, well, see, this is what we did. I mean, all kind of cynicism about this. I want to take this at its face value, and I would just say that what this lady did is really hard to understand for anyone who is not in Russia.
Peter Zalmayev, I want to thank you for being with us, Director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Finally, we just have 10 seconds, but the significance of the prime ministers of Poland, Slovenia, as well as Czech Republic coming to meet with Zelensky in Ukraine's capital, where you are, in Kiev?
An incredible vote of confidence in Kiev, in Ukraine, and the ability of Ukrainians to hold their capital, to defend it, a show of support. We need as much of that as we can.
Peter Zalmayev, thank you so much for being with us, hosting a television program in Ukraine based just outside of Kiev. Coming up, Joshua Yaffa is with us of The New Yorker. He's just left Ukraine. His latest piece, What the Russian Invasion Has Done to Ukraine. He'll take us on his journey. Stay with us.